Carve all-court. For the TennCom Awards, I gave the best power racket of the year to the Carve 100. Definitely a controversial decision given that Carve itself is essentially an unknown player in this space, and their first two frames are, and there's no nice way to put it, copycats. So how on earth can a copycat frame lead the power segment? Well, I genuinely think that this Carve 100 offers two unique aspects that we just don't see in other power frames. First, the feel is outstanding. Carve is a new company with a bare bones philosophy. There's no marketing team making up new ways to describe plastic dampening text. It's just plain black. It's a racket made from 90% carbon and 10% fiberglass. It's just really rare that you run into a company that's so open about their frame's composition. Basically, all this means is that you get a brand new high quality tennis racket for $160 US. That's $100 less than what Babolat offers. Now, I'm not saying that the Carve 100 or the All Court is a perfect substitute for the Aero 100. The stability, especially off center, isn't quite there, and the energy return, the power levels, they're like a half step below what you can get from Babolat. The lack of technologies or whatever mean that the ball pocketing also doesn't feel quite as deep or feel quite as plush, but for me the spin is still there, and I personally do prefer the feel of this Carve. The hitting feel with the Carve 100 is much closer to my Aero Rafa than the standard Babolat Pure Aero 100. As Babolat themselves put it, the Pure Aero Rafa completely lacks tech. There is no dampening, and the same is true with this Carve. So you get a connection to the ball that simply doesn't exist with the normal Aero 100. On center or off center, Carve tells you exactly what's going on with the string bed. The feel is connected without being overly jarring. It's pure and gimmick free, which is just what us enthusiasts want. The swing feel, or what it feels like to swing this racket, is much closer to the Pure Aero 100 than it is to the Aero Rafa, and it's even kind of close to what you'd expect from like a Blade 98 or the Percept 100D. The Carve All Court wants you to swing through the ball, leaning kind of into every shot the way an all court player would. And even though we're dealing with like this classic spin mold, the Carve really wants you to flatten out your shots and hit more deep, penetrating balls. Considering how open this pattern is, the volleys feel pretty solid, and the slices are actually relatively predictable. So my personal thoughts on the Carve 100. As cool it is to have a blacked out paint job, the Carve 100 just isn't a switch for me personally. On paper, it does seem like it could be a serviceable substitute for my beloved Pure Aero Rafas, but the weight distribution makes the playability quite different. My Rafas are super polarized, meaning the weight is pushed towards the tip, and the tail of the frame, whereas the Carve has a much more centralized weight distribution. This level of polarization on my Rafas gives me unparalleled access to spin on my forehand, and I'd say the hitting feel is ever so slightly more solid. My personal unit did come in with a swing weight lower than I would prefer at 310 strung, but considering the cost savings you can find here, I'm not too bad about the plus or minus 7 kilogram per centimeter squared swing weight variance. It just blows my mind that at $160, Carve is able to keep up with the major OEMs when it comes to quality control. So player recommendations. I can easily recommend this racket to a pretty wide range of players simply due to its price. I think it's an especially compelling option for newer players looking for their first real racket, but I do think it goes even further than that. With so many of us looking for more power to keep up with the modern game, I think that Carve offers a refreshing option simply due to their lack of dampening tech. The Carve retains so much more feel than you'd find with a typical 100 score inch power or spin racket, making it a much more natural transition for those of us who are pretty picky about how their racket feels. Now, again, it's not all good. There are a few things that I'd like to see improved on future models. One, I think that the font choice and the text lacks a little bit of cohesion. I do respect that they've essentially gone with no design here, just blacked out as a cost savings measure, but I would like to see a font choice that doesn't make me feel like I'm using Microsoft Word in a grade 2 computer class. Second, the grommets do feel a bit below average. Again, I can understand this if it's a cost savings measure and it's going to significantly lower the price, but they do feel a little bit brittle and thin. I personally haven't had any issues as of yet, but I don't think I'd expect them to age quite as well as something you'd find with a major OEM. Third, the trapdoor isn't super accessible. The sticker, which is the logo here on mine, was a little bit misaligned, and it covers the access hole that you'd stick your awl in, so you kind of have to get a little bit rough to get in there. And for my game personally, I'd like to see like a tour version or something with a 330 plus swing weight and a higher static weight, but that's just me being selfish. So final thoughts. Overall, I think that Carve's greatest strengths are the major manufacturer's greatest weaknesses, and that helps this racket really stand out in a crowded market. There's a humbling sense of transparency with this brand, honesty in where the molds come from, how the layups are developed, and what specs you can actually expect. The pricing is accessible, and the customer service has been, at least for me, pretty direct and very personal, and this time in a good way.